wear sandals and look Israeli, so my stereotypical Israel. And these are Tiffany. So I just t-shirt, jeans, it's the Israeli garb. Sometimes I go, I want to be Israeli today.
And they're feisty, but they're very friendly. Very friendly.
Well, sometimes the world jeans, I mean, years ago, jeans were like red. I was
Darren
maybe somehow I was in a show. I was wearing overalls. And the person that wanted the shops wanted them so bad I was willing to trade her jacket for what I was wearing. So I went out the hotel. And so I traded my clothes I was wearing, changed my clothes, traded in my nice Jalaba jacket in exchange for my overalls. It was a weird way of showing
She came out from behind the sofa, probably when I went to bed or when I left to eat. But the minute she went by the sofa. But at the end, after 5 days, she came out,
on and off, more
sat by us and let us pet her.
friends with
That
Adolfo.
was a big step for her. Yes.
We have done
That's why I went to a new I used to event last night. They were playing a movie at the Art Theater. Yeah, but I went there last night. No point.
No, you know what I'm going to do the next time?
Happy birthday.
Your birthday's today, Ruth? Yes. Oh, happy birthday. Let me give you a hug. Oh, and you look lovely in that. Did you get Jane to go with you? Hi. How are you? Good to see you.
All day I cannot remember his name. Mantle, Larry Mantle. He's a good interviewer. Oh, nice. We've gone twice, I think, to around Oscar time. Larry interviews a whole bunch of critics. Yeah, but I love that. He's the best critic. I hate him when Justin Chen from the LA Times, he moved out from the LA Times, and he's my favorite critic. And so I love doing that.
That was a very good show.
Yeah, I usually don't like sitting here.
I decided looking on a map, I guess to Krakow, and then from Krakow it's just a short trip.
Yeah, because it will make you say,
It's so
Baby, his name is Noah.
It's California. Trust.
He was sleeping there, I noticed it. What's her name?
Oh, yes.
I'm just gonna start singing. The tree of life is for everyone, a gift of love from the Holy One. Its branches sing a song of peace, and they're the sweetest fruit for all to eat. Eitz Chaim Hi, Lama Chazikim Ba. Eitz Chaim Hi fills the air. Eitz Chaim Hi, Lama Chazikim Ba. The tree of life is for all to share. The tree of life reveals the way to all who dream of better days, and it restores my soul with hope and calm, and welcomes us with open arms. Let's see if you can sing it with me. Eitz Chaim Hi, Lama Chazikim Ba. Eitz Chaim Hi fills the air. Eitz Chaim Hi, Lama Chazikim Ba. The tree of life is for all to share. Eitz Chaim Hi, Lama Chazikim Ba. Eitz Chaim Hi fills the air. Eitz Chaim Hi, Lama Chazikim Ba. The tree of life is for all to share. One more time. Eitz Chaim Hi, Lama Chazikim Ba. Eitz Chaim Hi fills the air. Eitz Chaim Hi, Lama Chazikim Ba. The tree of life is for all to share. We sing Eitz Chaim Hi because Eitz Chaim Hi, the Eitz Chaim, the tree of life, is our Torah. And we're here today to celebrate the receiving of the Torah and the study. We'll study Torah a little bit. Before we start, though, just a few words. As we gather tonight for Shavuot, the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai, we do so carrying both joy and grief. Just hours ago, we learned of a horrific attack in Boulder where several people were burned while demonstrating with Run for Their Lives. A group calling for the immediate release of the remaining hostages, a peaceful group. We are still mourning Sarah Milgram and Yaron Lashinsky, who were senselessly murdered 2 weeks ago. This all feels so overwhelming. And yet, and still, we are here. Shavuot commemorates the receiving of the Torah from Mount Sinai, but we did not receive the Torah as individuals. We received it as a community. And tonight we come together as a community. And by gathering together, we are acting defiantly. They want us to be scared and to stay at home. But even in pain, we come together to study, to question, and to return to the Torah. So I hope that by being here tonight and in community, you feel a little less alone in this world. So let's study, let's listen, and let's learn together. So I thought we would, before we study, sing Hine Matov, because we are here gathered together as brothers and sisters in community. Hine Matov u'manayim, shevet achim gam yachad. Hine Matov u'manayim, shevet achim gam yachad. Hine Matov, shevet achim gam yachad. Hine Matov, shevet achim gam yachad. Hine Matov u'manayim, shevet achim gam yachad. Hine Matov u'manayim, shevet achim gam yachad. Okay, let's study the book of Ruth. Could I have some helpers to hand out our study sheets? Thank you. Here.
They told me to be the helper.
There you go. Oh, I gave away too many. I hope I have enough. Don't look ahead. Yeah, I only got to here. So while you're before, you don't have to worry about the, oh, you know what? I need one for myself. Thank you.
No, mine.
So the book of Ruth, it's actually my favorite story in the Bible. I love this book. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you the story in bits and pieces, and then we'll look at these verses, and you'll break up into Havruta, into groups of 2 or 3, talk about the questions, and then we'll gather together again, and you'll tell me what you discussed. So the story starts with this man named Elimelech and his wife Naomi and their 2 children, Machlon and Chilon, and they are in Bethlehem, and there's a famine. So they decide to go to Moab, where they hear that there is food. And they travel to Moab, and eventually Elimelech dies. And the 2 sons marry Moabite women, Ruth and Orpah. So they get married. They're there about 10 years. And during that time, the 2 sons die. And it's just Naomi and her 2 daughters-in-law. So Naomi decides it's time to go back to Bethlehem. She hears that there's food there now. So she gathers her daughters-in-law, and they make their way to Bethlehem. But along the way, she says to them, go back home. Go back to your moms. Go back to your families. Go back to your gods. You don't need to come with me. I'm never going to have any more sons. And if by some miracle I did have sons, you're not going to be with me long enough to wait for them to grow up. So you should take care of yourselves and go home. And after some convincing, Orpah decides to leave, but Ruth says the famous quote, which I have here, do not urge me to leave you, to turn back and not follow you. For wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. Thus and more may Adonai do to me, if anything but death parts me from you. So I have the first few quotes here, which are really about these Israelites living in Moab. And so that first experience of immigration. So look at those first few questions. Find a friend. I don't know if we have an even number or an odd number, so 2 or 3 people per group. And go through these questions, and we'll gather together in a few minutes. Just the first section. Don't go to the next square. So up and just from this square and these questions.
No, but the thing is, when you leave your home to go to a new place, it's scary because you don't know what to expect. Uncertainty creates fear, and it's a risk. But if you don't take the risk, they would have died, right? They would have died if they stayed.
It's all about the discussion.
And sometimes, you gotta think of it
What do you think challenges
as an adventure so that you're not as afraid. Don't you think that's...
And so my first thought was about the Moabites speaking different language. The first challenge is they can't speak
What do you think were the challenges?
anyone know Moabite.
What about people hostile?
No.
Could they
They
just
speak
enough
Moabite.
Do they have enough food to recover?
I've heard that.
Right? Will they accept it? Because a lot of people are, frightened by strangers, like what's happening now, kind of, not always welcoming strangers. How would it have felt to return to Israel? What were the struggles that left being
about the family going to Moab to begin with.
What do you think were the challenges faced? Is that the question?
Yeah, so going to Moab to begin with, not going back to Bethlehem. Not going to
No, that's my point is still that it's traveling.
As she determined, how would it have felt to leave Moab to return to Israel?
Because when they left to go to Moab, with the
Well,
son,
if she's embracing
and
Judah,
in Moab they married
that's the
women.
home of the Jew.
That's what we're talking about. Going to Moab. Then there's the return.
So they weren't alone.
They weren't alone.
They weren't alone.
Yeah.
Men died. All the men died. Naomi left with her daughter-in-law.
Why would Ruth choose to leave her homeland? Because she didn't want to be separated from Naomi. She loved Naomi, and Naomi was leaving. And Naomi, since Ruth's husband was dead, right? Naomi's sons died. Ruth would have been alone, and Naomi was her family. So, why would she leave to look because she felt secure with Naomi? Naomi was her family now since her husband was dead. Right? I mean, we moved to California to be with our kids, right? She moved to Israel because Naomi was with her, and Naomi family.
In those days, if you were married off, you can't really go back to the family. You're like, you're defiled or whatever.
Obstacles might she have encountered?
It was like better to
Now,
try your
what
luck with Naomi
obstacles
than
might she have encountered if she stayed in Moab? Well, she would be alone. Maybe. Yes.
It seems that some people didn't catch the names of people. Is anyone else confused? So Elimelech is the husband who dies. There's 2 sons who die. Naomi's the mother-in-law, and Ruth is the daughter-in-law. Any other people confused about who's who? They went from Bethlehem to Moab, and then after the death of the 3 men, they returned to, just Naomi and Ruth returned to Bethlehem. Got? Ruth had never been there before. She's never been there before. It's a brand new place for Ruth. And what? And she's not Jewish. Yes. They need.
No, the Moabites were a country next.
Yes, she was. So, I don't know if she would have had, I think she would have been lonely because she didn't have names.
There's a lot of wars actually. The tribes in the Moabites.
That's a good point. Yes, that's a good point.
So I'm sure she was pretty awkward walking in like.
Does anybody want to share any thoughts that your group had about this?
That's good.
Let's go on to the next part, but first I want to see if anybody has anything to share about this part, which is really about Naomi's family's experience as immigrants in Moab, and then Ruth will be an immigrant in Bethlehem, in Israel. So this is just that first beginning part of the story. Anyone want to share what they talked about? Yeah.
Well, one of the challenges for me is really trying to place myself in the position of somebody in a group 3,000 years ago, right? And going through, I don't know, a wilderness type place, or, I mean, I've been to Israel, so, okay, so I just kind of pretend there are very few of the current places that are inhabited there. But anyway, like, okay, what is it to
to travel in that area as a group of people. You're leaving famine, you don't have much, you don't have food, right? You probably don't have many things of value, right? You come across another tribe that's not yours, so what do? What happens? They look at you, who are you? You look at them, who are you? I don't know. That was the hardest thing for me.
Yeah.
I was just thinking, oftentimes in our biblical stories, times of extreme spiritual awareness and really these biblical heroes emerge during a time of extreme human suffering, grief, hunger, just horrible losses and horrible situations. I think we need to break that standard and stop, that has to stop being the standard for Jewish enlightenment. We have to get to a place where just a nice little Torah study can really get us there instead of like some horrible human tragedy.
Yeah, from your mouth.
It seems to me that all females would probably be a challenge at that time.
Oh, yeah.
In a male's world.
It's all about that.
Yeah.
Finding the man who's going to take care of you next, right?
Yeah, and especially with two young ladies that, it's difficult.
Yeah.
That men decide what happens to them.
One thing that we talked about is the fact that Naomi and Ruth somehow had some kind of claim to Elimelech's land. It's not really clear to what extent they could claim it or not, or what they needed to do that. And we don't really know whether Ruth had any claim to land in Moab.
Right.
So why would she go? Why would she go? Why would she stay? That's something. And the laws of who inherits the land, who has claims, were very different then than the way it is now. So it's really hard to get our minds around this. But one thing that could be, obviously they left because they couldn't farm their land because there was a famine. Going back to Judah and going back and Ruth going there to a place where maybe she will have some sort of claim on the land, whereas in Moab, we just don't know.
Yeah, I have some thoughts on that. I think that Orpah leaves, and she's eventually going to remarry, and whatever she, from her husband, whatever land there is, whatever son she has, there's not going to be any connection to Naomi. It's going to be separate in her own thing, and I feel like Ruth loved Naomi so much that there must not have been something in Moab, or if there was, she didn't want to stay because she wanted to come back with Naomi so that if there was somebody in Naomi's family, she could continue Naomi's son's line because she loved her so much. So she was doing it for her. By the way, this is the only story in the Hebrew Bible of two women with a loving, kind relationship to each other.
Yes, it's my favorite story too.
Yeah, it's my favorite story. It's the only story in the Bible with two women with a loving, kind relationship to each other.
So I always thought this was my story.
It is your story.
But so I was always struck by the bond between Ruth and Naomi. Like whatever remained in Moab for Ruth can't have been that great because she married into the family that was from Judah. And it's clear she became a part of that family. That really became her family. Like she's so connected with her mother-in-law. Like her mother-in-law is her mother. So we don't know if maybe Naomi has something to go back to. The land, if the famine's over, maybe they have some claim to land or some family remaining in Judah they can go back to. And Ruth can be a part of that family.
Exactly.
In Judah.
Yeah, that's right. We hope so. We'll see. We'll find out. Anyone else?
We were talking about how, in both cases, Naomi's family, when they went to Moab, and Ruth, when she goes to Israel, being strangers and trying to fit in to another culture, figure out another place, but particularly for Ruth, I'm sorry, for Ruth, that she would be maybe a convert at best. And so there might be another layer of difficulty being accepted.
Right.
I was just going to comment on how would it have felt to return home to Israel. And it occurs to me sometimes when people have lived elsewhere for a time period, they have an idealized idea of the place they left. And when they get home, they could be disillusioned. Things could have changed, and it could be a hard transition. Plus the fact that what were the struggles Ruth felt being a stranger in Israel? As a Moabite woman, you know, she may not have been accepted by the people in Israel.
Right, right. Good points. Okay, so I'm going to fill in the next part of the story. It's not written here because it would have taken way too much paper. So if you're confused about anything, if I'm missing anything, before we break into Chavruta again, just raise your hand and I'll try to clarify. So what happens next is Naomi and Ruth are now living in Israel, and Naomi doesn't have a way to provide for Ruth. So she tells Ruth to go out and glean some fields, whatever that means, okay? So she has to go do this, and it turns out that there's what is called a redeemer, so somebody who can save them, who can take Naomi's land, take care of her, marry Ruth, and continue the line. And Boaz is that redeemer. Naomi doesn't tell this to Ruth, though. Ruth just goes out into the fields, ends up in someone's field, starts gleaning. There's this very lovely man, and he says, hey, don't go to any other field but mine, because I won't bother you. Other men and other fields may bother you. Stay with my women who are working the fields, and we will take care of you. And so now you see the quote that I have here in this box. So she says, why are you so kind as to single me out when I am a foreigner? And he says, I have been told of all that you did for your mother-in-law after the death of your husband. So remember, Ruth could have gone back to Moab, gone to her family, and married somebody else and been taken care of. But she took a risk, and she decided to stay with Naomi and take care of her. So he says, you left your father and mother and the land of your birth and came to a people you had not known. May Adonai reward your deeds. May you have a full recompense from Adonai, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have sought refuge. So then we have another set of questions here. So how was Ruth treated by Naomi, by Boaz? How do Ruth's struggles as an immigrant in Bethlehem mirror today's immigrants? And how does Boaz's treatment of Ruth reflect how we should treat the stranger or the immigrant? Is there any confusion about that section of the story? Okay, discuss.
I don't know why she didn't go out with it, but Boaz was really a wonderful person. He was very welcoming. He was very. She might have been an old. I think there's something. She could have been. of age. But Naomi was older. No, but Naomi was older, and maybe didn't have the energy.
All I'm saying is that, given what I've Ruth is a widow too, so I know, but that doesn't, I don't think that counts as any kind of effort. But I think I'm going to help each other. But I think the mutual each other, I think they're really bonded, they're really like each other, and both want to be there for each other. Yeah. Do you think it's equal though? Do that actually end up
But maybe also because no, Naomi was kind to Ruth. That Naomi, Ruth wants to pay her, reciprocate by helping Naomi. She loves when you love somebody, you want to help.
you take care of your daughter?
You don't question. You want to
So
help.
she's your daughter-in-law, but she's essentially now the
It's
daughter.
very nice.
I would say that it's equal because Naomi's sister.
How do Ruth struggles as an immigrant to best mirror today's immigrants?
I have a whole different take. I think it's like go to
Going to an unknown land.
do this for
You don't know where
you don't have to leave your people. You don't have to. It's okay if you don't want to do that. So I think it's more of a bonding. I've always felt that they were there for each other. I see more empathy.
Well, I mean, there's still the unknown which
So let's go back to the.
but at least, I mean, some immigrants today come by themselves. She and Naomi, you know, and now you don't want to go visit them with Trump.
Naomi.
It's not welcoming. Stuff. How does Boaz treat him? Reflect how he should treat a stranger. Welcome the stranger. Be kind. Helpful. Yeah, no, it's the antithesis to what's going on.
Or is this something that's depicted as being sort of
Before you go to
So that's why they're more welcoming. If so many, Randy said that if there were thousands upon thousands
And Ruth went to some and then
maybe there were, you know, like
she
what
introduces
happened
herself and he
under
says, oh, I
Biden.
know about you.
No,
But
don't
then,
say that.
then Ruth goes home and actually says to Naomi, I was he's a Kinsman. So, but she didn't know that.
But you're not going to change
Well, because everyone knew that this woman, this Ruth the Moabite, had been, she did such a good thing by staying with Naomi that her reputation was It doesn't say that in the book, but you just kind of infer because Boaz says, oh, I know all about you. So, actually, you read this every Shavuot. Yes.
wrongfully deported and the
That's the Torah portion. So we read the book of Ruth, but it's more like, you know how we do a Haftarah study? We do Torah and Haftarah. This is more like the Haftarah, right? So the Torah is the Ten Commandments, but this is what we study. Same, I wrote my final big paper on the book of Ruth. It's really a beautiful, yeah. Okay. All right, does anyone have any thoughts? We'll just take a couple of comments because we are running late. So just maybe 2 or 3 comments. Anyone have anything they want to share about this section? Anyone want to share anything? Yep.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I just wanted to say that this story was one of my favorite stories, this idea of love and affection, and then, of course, a nice ending, you know, love story.
Oh, don't tell the ending yet. We haven't gotten there.
But anyway, I love
We already know.
I know. I'm gonna share the ending in just a moment.
So Cantor, I'd like you to meet Gaston, who is new to our community and is a friend of Alain's, and he has a really short, interesting story to share with us.
Okay.
Yeah, so being an immigrant, and I have been an immigrant in this country for, oh my God, 18 years now.
Oh.
Starting with a student visa, then going to a STEM visa that allowed me to work and gain professional experience. And then I got sponsored by a company, H-1B visa. That's the visa type that Trump announced that he hated so much, right?
Mm-hmm.
Luckily, right now, I'm in more stable waters. I do have a green card right now, but it's up for renewal.
Oh.
So I just filed a petition to get it renewed. So there's a little bit of anxiety. And what does it mean to be in that situation? Well, since the current administration took office, I refrained from flying over to Europe to visit the rest of my family. So we do Zoom and other, calling on WhatsApp or something, because it's just too much of a risk after all that I've heard, that people with green cards even may not be allowed to re-enter. And then you have a huge problem because you have a car, you have an apartment with furniture, and you have other belongings. And then how do you organize all that if you can't enter? You have to call other people here to take care of everything. And I don't want to be such a burden to my friends over here. Yeah, but I think that's a good parallel too, when Ruth came back as an immigrant, right? It's a different perspective when you are an immigrant. But I also think it's a good thing that there are immigrants around the world everywhere, because they enrich the country, and they tend to work hard because they want to achieve something. And I always say motivation is contagious. So it brings other people, that the energy brings other people with. And that's, I think, a beautiful thing.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Okay, one more comment, and then we're gonna wrap it up.
I just want to respond something to Sebastian, because if you had your green card for 10 years, the best thing is to apply for the citizenship. That's what I did. I had my green card for 10 years, and instead of renewing it, I applied. I went to a test to pass, but honestly, it's not very difficult. I was asked, for instance, what is the capital of the United States of America? What is the ocean on the east of the America? Things like that. And you need to pass 7 questions on 10. So I had 7 answers, and I was waiting for the 8th. I said, what's going on? What about the 8th? But you passed, you don't need to have So,
right. I'm going to fill in the next piece of the story. The field is now done, the harvest is done, so Ruth goes home to Naomi, and Naomi says, I need you to get married. I need you to go get married, and I want you to go to Boaz. So when he's done gleaning reaping the harvest, he's going to eat, he's going to drink, he's going to lie down, and he's going to cover himself with a blanket or a robe. Go to him when he's asleep, uncover his feet, lie next to his feet, right? And that could mean a lot of things. It actually, what it means is, so he wakes up in the middle of the night, and he sees this woman and says, who are you? And she says, I'm Ruth. I'm the one that you've taken care of. Take your robe. So when you uncover a man's feet, you're asking for him to then protect you and to cover you and to give you protection. So she asks him, please be my redeemer. Please marry me. And he says, absolutely. But there's actually someone ahead of me. There's another redeemer. So first, I need to make sure it's okay with him. So he goes to the gates, he waits for of the town, he waits for the Redeemer to come, he gets 10 townspeople together, and he says, your kinsperson Naomi is here, Elimelech has died, you are the Redeemer, so you can take her land and take care of her and marry her, not marry her, but take her land and redeem her. And he says, fine, I'll do that. And then he says, but you also have to marry Ruth, her daughter-in-law. He says, I can't do that, because that would kind of mess up his own sons and his own line and his own, what they were going to inherit. So this would be complicated. So he says, no, Boaz, you go ahead and you be the Redeemer. So Boaz goes back to Ruth and says, I will marry you, and everybody's happy. And meanwhile, Ruth in the book is often called Ruth the Moabite. Even after she's converted, she's Ruth the Moabite. And the women in the town, they're so happy for Naomi. You have the best daughter-in-law. She has taken care of you. Then she has a baby, and everyone is so happy because the baby a son is born to Naomi. They named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, father of David. So this child, who is the product of a convert, is the grandfather of King David. So here are the next set of questions. We'll just spend a few minutes because we need to get onto the panel. But what can Ruth teach us about immigrants' contribution to society? Why is it significant that David is her ancestor? And in the story of Balaam in the Torah, the Moabites are the Israelites' enemies. Enemies. So now, and Ruth the Moabite is treated so well in Bethlehem now. So what do you think about that, and what significance does that have? And how can this book inform our current attitudes towards immigration? So just take a few moments and think about those things. Was everything clear, by the way? Okay.
Right, that they're all criminals, he stereotypes them all. Right. The thing is, if you prevent somebody from coming, an immigrant, like you prevent them coming in, like a Chinese immigrant or something, if he's really smart, or she's smart, they can make tremendous contributions to this country. Right? And I was reading something about Harvard, how this guy came to study graduate school at Harvard, like 3 years ago, and he helped discover something, through his research. As long as you're not bringing in criminals, there's always the potential that a person that comes in can really contribute to society, add to it. Like Ruth having the child of the grandfather of King David, we all know about King David. So that's yes.
I used to volunteer for grad night. High school grad night is where they stay all night.
But it's interesting, if people,
And then doing grad nights, like the end is graduates graduating. They were all mixed people. I've seen so many mixed couples, boyfriend and girlfriends, who, maybe were separated and didn't know each other one-on-one. And it's like groups of friends that were all mixed trans. I was like, end of Wilson. This is what the world should look like.
All right, let's take a couple minutes and just, are there any thoughts about this part of the story that you want to share, or the story in general? Yes.
Destroys the whole myth of bad blood, like a certain felon in our country is, saying to people.
Mine is just a question. During this period, if my memory serves correctly, there was a patriarchal inheritance of a religion. A child born to a Jewish father was Jewish. So why would they, in the Bible, make a point of saying she was a Moabite mother? It wouldn't have really mattered. And she wasn't, because she converted. And I don't know when the law came into effect that we are
to treat converts as our own. We're not to distinguish between the two.
Well, her treatment is always good throughout the whole story. They just, for some reason, they call her that, I guess to distinguish her, but she's always treated well.
Right, I'm just wondering,
Yeah.
maybe that rule came after this story.
The rule of
not treating, just to label her the Moabite, even though they were kind to her, really, you're not supposed to even do that. Once you
Distinguish?
convert, you are a Jewish person.
Yeah, I think it was just the no, okay.
So I think that it's really significant that they keep calling her a Moabite, because I think maybe they want the Torah wants to emphasize that we should not have historical enmity. We shouldn't keep hating groups of people, that they can become people we can have peace with, and even people we can accept into our society, and then their great-grandson can be our king.
That's great. I think that's beautiful. That's a good point. So we keep saying that to say, but we love her, and she's no different, and you can make peace with your former enemies.
I'd like to reduce this to a very simple formula. So we trust us, and we don't trust them. But when a them becomes one of us, it changes everything.
Wow. Thank you.
So you're asking the question here, why are the Moabites in the Balaam story treated one way and she's treated another way? I'm actually going to take a liberty and take not exactly the Balaam story, but the story of Pinchas, which happens right after Balaam. Yeah. And there the Moabites are really, really bad, right? And the problem there is that the Israelites are marrying the Moabites and worshiping their gods.
Right.
Whereas here, Naomi says, your people shall be my people and your God my God. So she is accepting the God of the Israelites, and maybe that makes all the difference. But this raises the question, I mean, most of today's panel is going to be about immigration to the United States, like moving from place to place. But if you're moving from a people to a people, what does this say about those of us who have chosen to marry people who are of a different faith? Is it still a question? Is it still the question of do you need to accept the other person's God in order to be accepted as part of the people?
That's a wonderful question. She does tell her daughters-in-law to go back and worship their gods. And Orpah says, okay, and Ruth says, no, I'm going to take on your God. That's a really good question. Let's do, okay, last comment, because we need to, we need some Sam.
Well, the fact that King David has got the blood of a Moabite, and then Solomon's the next guy, right? They were the greatest kings of Israel. So that shows how we can, I think, having immigrant blood in our country is what makes America great. And I think that's what made the line of Israel a great line, and made Solomon and David the great saviors of our people.
It's a good place to end. I'm going to turn it over to Sharon. Thank you.
All right, before we start our panel, I'm going to give you all like 1 minute, sort of stand up, stretch, whatever. I know you've already sitting for a while. Stretch, whatever you need to do, and then we'll get started in just a moment. If our panelists want to come on up and join me here. All right, everyone. All right, everyone. Let's regather. Well, Hag Sameach, everyone. I'm so happy that so many of you chose to spend this Sunday evening with us here at Temple Israel. Shavuot is actually one of my favorite holidays. It's such a beautiful opportunity to gather together to mark the ending of the counting of the Omer, the period of 49 days between Pesach and Shavuot. We've been building up to this moment of Shavuot. And so here we are, we've arrived 49 days later. We're at Mount Sinai, everyone, and they say that we were all there, right? We were all there in some way. So you can imagine yourself there, or your ancestors of yesteryear. I want to welcome everyone this evening. We have a few people for whom this is their first time ever at Temple Israel, so that's really exciting. Some of us have been here a long time, so if this is your first time in the building or one of your first programs here, thanks for taking the chance to walk in the doors. We're really glad to welcome you. And to our newer members, welcome as well. I know that Cantor Cooper mentioned the attack in Boulder. I just wanted to say something a little further about it. Many of our community members every Sunday participate in the Run for Our Lives. I always want to say Walk for Our Lives, Run for Their Lives, because it sounds like you're not. But yes, it's called Run for Their Lives. They walk, but Run for Their Lives group every Sunday under the leadership of our past president, one of our past presidents, Mark Dressner. And so especially to those of you who make that a priority, we're holding you in our hearts. What a scary, terrifying thing to think about happening in any community. And it feels really close to home. So thanks for your continued leadership, Mark, and for those of you who are out there every Sunday, Kol HaKavod, all the honor to you. It's day 605 of the hostages being in Gaza. May they come home today. And I have to say a special welcome to Jeremy Rosen. We're so glad he's here. Jeremy lives in Israel. He's visiting his family, and always great to have you back. I don't know if this is home or that's home, but in one of your homes, we're glad to have you here. Okay. Any other comments before we get started the panel? Yeah, Martine? Tuesday.
Next Tuesday, not this coming Tuesday, but the following Tuesday. We'll be meeting here at 5:30 in the Purple.
We have a couple more tickets left, so if you're interested in that, you can speak with Martine or me later. Love to have you join us. Great. Okay. Well, Cantor Cooper and I were so excited to think about the connection between studying the book of Ruth and talking about modern-day immigration stories. It just seemed like a wonderful match. So this evening we are joined by three congregants who are all immigrants to this country. And I think so often we are, when we know people well, we don't think about them as immigrants. It's just kind of it's an unnecessary, or just not unnecessary, it's just a characteristic maybe that we don't think about very much. You're just part of our community. And so when I reached out to Adolfo and Maggie and Alain, I think they were, I don't know, you can tell me how you felt, but I think maybe they were, what you would say, we were surprised or something that we would think about you in that role. And so we're really happy this evening that you'll be sharing your stories with us. We look forward to learning from you. Each of them has a really unique and interesting experience of coming to this country at different ages and different challenges that they experienced. Let me introduce our panelists. This is Adolfo Guzman-Lopez, and perhaps in a reversal of roles, he's on the panel today. Often he's sitting where I am, so welcome to this side of the table. Maggie Kosmin joins us here as our second panelist. I've actually known Maggie since I was a teenager, so it's fun to have her still in my life all these years later. And lastly, Alain Silverston, who's been a member of Temple Israel also for quite a number of years, and we're so glad to have the three of you here this evening. So we're going to spend about 45 minutes having a panel conversation, then there'll be an opportunity for the audience to ask questions. Okay? All right. And if you guys want to plan to pass that microphone, or Adolfo, you and I suppose can share a microphone. All right. So, okay, you'll pass it. All right. Let's start with talking a little bit about where each of you were born, and if you could tell us a little bit about your childhood in your native country. Where were you born, and a little bit about your childhood?
So do I start?
All right, Alain.
Okay, so you might hear a little soft accent from France. I was born in Paris.
Barely. We can
11
barely,
district, no?
We can barely notice it.
Oh, okay. and from a family who, a part was an old Jewish family. Everybody in my family was Jewish. We never left the religion, even if some were not very religious. But we have been Jewish. By the way, well, I will continue later.
Okay, great.
Well, can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. I actually was born in Germany, but that's not my country in that sense. So I grew up in Israel during the 50s, and we were immigrants there. So I was actually an immigrant twice. My parents were Holocaust survivors, and I was born in Germany, I said, but in a displaced persons camp, which was run by the Americans, and they were amazing. I mean, they created a pretty good situation for the people who were there and couldn't go to Israel, couldn't go back to where they came from. So anyway, my story is really of a child. So my memory is from as a child, not so much as an adult. And
what was your childhood like when you were living in Israel?
Okay, great. We lived in the beginning in one of those, I wouldn't call it a camp, it was like tents, right? How many of you have been to Netanya, which is an amazing city, right? Well, at that time, it was all sand. And so a lot of the immigrants who came right after the war, they created these tents for them in the beginning, and I have pictures of that. This little baby, I was like less than 2 years old. And after that, we, as a family, we moved to a place, oh my God, that would have been, if you think of it as hell, it was hell, in the sense that it was a bombed out city during the war. So we found a place, one room, and the other room was bombed out. But that's okay, you're a child, what do you know? So the people around where I lived were people who came from the Middle East, mostly. So in our little neighborhood, I wouldn't even call it a neighborhood, it was like an alley. It was us, as my parents were Hungarian Jews, a Moroccan family, Bulgarian family, Tunisian family, Turkish and Greek. And so I was actually exposed to all these people who were immigrants, but they were Jewish, of course. And they didn't speak Hebrew, but the kids were, actually we were in a daycare in Israel. I mean, they cared about the kids a lot. So I was in a daycare, that's where we learned Hebrew, but we still spoke the languages of what parents did. So I had the pleasure, if I want to think about it, and the opportunity to be exposed to people, even though we had the same religion, but they were all pretty different in the way they worshipped, if you want to call it that way. And I learned how to speak Ladino. I learned how to curse in Arabic. Let's see, I learned how to love Greek food, and I never had any better food than I did then. And then, okay, so that's the first part. But again, my experience was, in that part, was really, you're a child. However, during the 56 war, I do remember that my father had to dig a ditch. So in case there were any bombings or anything, we were able to get into that. But I and other little kids, we were about 9 by then, so we had this feeling of safety. We knew that the Israeli IDF will protect us. We did hear the Nasser screaming on the radio, like they still do, death to Israel, the whole bit. And of course, as a kid, you listen and you ask, what is he saying? You just knew that he was angry. But I remember going out and seeing the MiGs flying by, and I knew that that was our pilots. So you did get this feeling of you're protected, you're safe, compared to what our parents had to go through.
Thank you, Maggie.
You're
Well,
welcome.
all right.
That
well,
was long, but
That's okay. That's okay. I imagine the 1950s that there must have been a tremendously strong sense of Zionism. I mean, a brand new country, right? Building something together. It must have been a really exciting time to live there.
I was born in Mexico City in 1969. I say the year because that was really at the peak of this great moment of modernization of Mexico in the post-World War II period. And it led to my mother and father both coming to Mexico City from very small towns. My father from the coast in Veracruz, one of 8 kids. He actually ran away from home when he was 13 to make it big in Mexico City, either as a ranchera singer or a boxer. Didn't turn out for either of those careers. My mother had quite a few relatives in Mexico City, so she came there and worked both very humble families, very, really no generational wealth as we know it now. They fell in love, separated. They separated when I was about 2 years old. My mother and I came to Tijuana, where she had an aunt and where she had come to work, actually, probably 5 or 6 years before. And we lived there for, let's see, I was 3 to 7, about 4 years in Tijuana. Then we moved to San Diego. She was working cleaning houses in San Diego and that sort of thing. And so we lived in San Diego. She married my stepfather. I grew up in, if you know San Diego a little bit, kind of the South Bay area, national city, mostly Mexican, Filipino part of town. But she did something which really shaped my life quite a bit and really kind of set me up or reinforced kind of something which has been a part of my life, my whole life, which is being in between things, being in between languages, being in between countries, being in between cultures, being in between religions, being in between, lots of different things. So she, even though we lived in a mostly blue-collar part of town, she put me in schools 5 days a week in Pacific Beach, La Jolla. So I, for all intents and purposes, I was, and this was elementary, junior high, and high school, for all intents, I knew she cleaned houses, obviously, right? I knew that I wasn't, that I lived elsewhere and I was of a different class, more or less, but as a kid, you're just a kid, right? So, I was, my friends were the kids of, the doctors, accountants, lawyers, engineers, and that sort of thing, and I was college-bound as far as, because I was hanging out with all the college-bound kids, right? So, and then, living in San Diego was important because we would go to Tijuana a lot, even though we were undocumented, right, until 1986 with amnesty. So that also another example of in between, right? So that's a snapshot.
Thank you.
Can I add something? Because I came with a picture of my great-grandparents. I don't think that it would be possible to show it.
It is.
But that's okay. I thought it was interesting because the picture was made in 1896. The only picture of the whole family. They did that because the two eldest children left Ukraine. They were from Berchad in Ukraine to the United States through France. And so they arrived to New York. They were living in Queens. And one day, my great uncle had a terrible accident of a train or metro, and apparently even lost a leg. He sent a telegram to my grandmother, who was the next on the list, telling her, "Don't." Oh.
Go ahead.
Telling her, "Don't come. It's a horrible country." So the poor lady stayed in France. I have to say also that France was always a country of transition. So you see the whole family. So my great-grandfather and the 7 children plus the daughter-in-law. So the 3 in the middle, Samuel, the uncle, his wife on his left, and his eldest sister left for the United States sometimes in 1900. Excuse me, before 1900, because I had a great uncle I met in 1990. He was 90. My grandmother is the lady on the left, the youngest one. No, well, not the youngest, but she's on the left. So she was told, "Don't come to the United States. It's a crazy country." Well, the bad story is she was arrested in Paris during the great raffle of Veldiv, and she was killed in Auschwitz. And on the 7 children, just 2 went to the United States, and the other, there is one of the young kids who was also killed in Auschwitz. The others survived. But I'm saying that because it shows a family, a typical Ukrainian Jewish family, emigrating. Some stayed in France, and that's what happened. So my grandmother met my grandfather, who was, my last name is Silverston. It's not typically French. I still don't know why my name is Silverstone. What I know is that they were members of the Silverston. These ones are called Schulman. And my family, Silverstone, they went through England, but I don't know exactly what happened. I'm sure that my great-grandmother was buried in Plymouth, England, but that's it. And after that, what else can I say? So I lived in Paris, in France, like my father. My father and my mother were both born in Paris. The only difference between them and myself, they were born in the 12th district, and I was born in the 11th district. And they were born in the 12th district because there is a wonderful hospital which is called Rothschild, and that's where they went. And so, how can I say that? We were raised in a French way. I forgot to mention that, so I never met my grandmother, of course, nor my grandfather, Silverstone, but I knew the parents of my mother, and especially my grandfather, who was a Jew from Bordeaux, a French Jew. It never called him Jew, he called him Israelite. That's how, and he was very proud of being Israelite. He was very proud also at that time. There was a politician whose name was Léon Blum, Jewish. So he was, and I lived in France until recently. I'm an old immigrant.
An old immigrant. That's a great transition. Before we transition, I want to say, Alain, your point about having family that had come to the States before, way before you ever came, and I know, Adolfo, you also had family that was living in, was it in Chicago or something, right? Family that was there, and Maggie, I know you had family that was still in Israel. It's like the family sometimes split, right? It's not like everybody came together, and that idea that you had to, that either you or your parents gave up something to try something new, and it wasn't like the whole family came together at the same time. So Alain mentioned that he's an old immigrant. We have different age immigrants, Maggie, can you tell us a little bit about what age you were when you came to the States, and how do you think that that age, being that age, affected your adjustment to living in the United States?
Okay, I was actually 14, and I was going to start high school eventually here. My brother was already here in the United States, and he told me that if I don't do well in school, in high school, in the beginning, I will be put in 8th grade in a school that's terrible. And I decided from then on, I'm going to be a good student, I'm going to work hard, and however, the language, of course, wasn't really great. But I had, in the beginning, the first year, I had wonderful teachers, a teacher of history and a teacher English. And they were studying Beowulf. And so it was tough on everybody. And so he told me, don't worry about it, you don't have to, but your grammar is better than theirs. I said, okay. So I did not have to do it, and I didn't have to get a grade. I was fine. Now, history class was another situation. This was world history, not yet American or government or anything like that. It was world history. Now, when I was in Israel in 7th and 8th grade, we learned world history, not just Jewish history. We learned Greek and Roman and even Chinese and Indian, but what I actually learned a lot of was the Persia and let's see, Mesopotamia. I even can't say it so well yet. So I had a hard time because the names of all these people, the leaders, were pronounced or written completely differently. And for example, I'll give you the name Xerxes, of course, was Koresh. But I kind of sit there in class and I said, oh my God, I know this all, but I don't know it. And so the teacher, Mr. McGuckin, was wonderful. And he says, I'm going to have one of the other students come and help you. And slowly but surely, I kind of got adjusted. But the other thing was actually, you're a teenager. So I was used to running around with shorts in Israel, dresses maybe on a holiday. I didn't shave my legs, no way. Clothes. The girls wore these wonderful sweaters. And
You were in New York City, right? Is where you came, or which, you were in New York City when you moved?
Yeah, but no.
Okay.
In New York City, I was only for 2 months.
Okay.
That's another story.
All right, and then it was New Jersey. Is that where you ended up?
Yeah,
okay.
it was New Jersey. East Orange, New Jersey was actually a middle-class city. Very few Jews. So I wasn't like somebody who went to New York or Brooklyn where you have a lot more Jews. So I was maybe one of few. However, they were African Americans, many, but they're all middle class, Irish, Italian, and I was very comfortable. And the reason I felt comfortable because when I grew up in Israel with all these diverse people, I was okay. I mean, I saw Yemenites, right, and so on. So anyway, but football, what's that? And so I decided to go to a game right at the beginning with some friends that I made already. They were very accepting. There was something about the fact that they all looked at me as someone exotic. They never heard of Israel. So anyway, they took me to a game, and I was freezing. It was cold, and I wasn't used to that. And they were screaming and yelling and excited. And then I heard them say something like, let's go, EO, on to victory. And there I was, screaming and yelling with them, but not knowing why, okay? So these are little things. Sororities, they had them. I didn't like it. I found it bizarre. What else?
That paints a good picture of what it'd be like to move someone when you're 14.
Was the difficulty in the beginning. okay, but my first experience coming, the first few
All right,
2 months.
let's, when you, sure, go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead.
When I first arrived, first of all, the idea of these wide street in New York, right? Beautiful cars. I've never seen so many cars. But I did not stay in New York. We went to the Bronx. So Bronx was another story. I spent a lot of time on the fire escape, staring at the world. And what I already told you, I watched TV, and I fell in love with bumblebee tuna and Hellmann's mayonnaise and Wonder Bread. And I was eating that quite a bit. But I wasn't, my parents were kind of afraid to let me go anywhere. But eventually, when I moved to New Jersey, it was a pretty good experience. But I'll tell you a little more later.
Great. So Adolfo, you said, so you were a young child when you came to San Diego. How do you think being such a young age impacted your immigrant experience?
I mean, I saw the experience from a child's point of view. I think if you ask my mom, a struggling single mom who had to work and try to figure out what to do with me, you'd get a different story, right? But yeah, I have a picture of me celebrating my 3rd birthday in Tijuana, so I know, I haven't really asked my mom, but okay, so I was in Tijuana. So I remember starting to cross the border with her probably around 4 years old, 5 years old, something like that, right? So we'd be in the car with several other ladies. They'd pay the driver, cross them over. Everybody had, whether passports or whatever. So to me, it's from the child's point of view, right? And yeah, nothing negative, really. Nothing about, kind of global economics, industrialized First Nation country, using the labor of a so-called third world country, but not really acknowledging the labor and exploiting it. I would learn that. I would learn that later at the Center for U.S.-Mexico Studies at UC San Diego. So it's from a child's point of view, a couple of things. At that age, you pick up language pretty quick, right? And so that was something, and also being in the environment, mostly, very middle class, upper middle class neighborhood with kids, that allowed me to pick up the language really quick, which, I never, when I think about it now as a middle-aged man, how so many people would look at me as a kid, clearly Mexican, right? I'm not Latino. I'm not Hispanic, I'm Mexican, right? And say, oh, you speak English so well. Right, okay, all right. It was a compliment, it was clearly a compliment, okay? But for a Mexican, you speak English so well, right? Okay, all right, but it really was beautiful, it really was. And I endeared myself to a lot of people, and I was cute. I'm not so cute anymore, but I was a very cute little kid. And my mom also worked in a place, this huge apartment complex in San Diego called the Oakwood Garden Apartments. And so this was 1976, 77, 78, 79. A lot of retirees from the East Coast, a lot of Jewish people, my mom had quite a few, Mr. and Mrs. Small, Mr. Temko, Mrs. Sutherland, Mrs. K, who left Vienna during the war, married a British man, and first time I had matzah brai as a 7 or 8 year old, was in her one bedroom apartment. So, yeah, one last point I'd like to make. So Lisa's great-grandfather came from Romania. Grandpa Dijan came from Romania in the 1920s, more or less. There's a picture. And so Lisa's grandfather was born in the old country and came, not sure exactly how old he was, but he was very young, right? So about 10 years ago or so, I was moderating. Some of you may know I'm a reporter, so I was moderating a panel, and it was about immigration, and the talk was of the 1.5 generation, right? So that's the generation that's in between. So the first generation is like Alain and Maggie, right? Well, no, it's not about age, is it? Well, it's sort of about age, but not about age, right? So I'm in between because I came so young, and so was Lisa's grandfather. So at that moment, I started to really think about him. He passed away in his 30s, and there's no opportunity to talk to him. But I related more to him, memories of the old country, adaptation to New York, Lower East Side. I think they had a business in the Bronx, a furniture business. I really related to that. And the land, I was asking myself, what did that family know about the land? Right, the land, right? Because my mother had very deep connections to the land in Mexico. So did my father, right? Lisa, no, Lisa doesn't. Lisa's assimilated, right? She's assimilated, right? And so I thought, so Lisa's generation would be like my grandkids. Right.
Thank you. Alain, how old were you when you moved to the United States?
Well, I was 46, I believe. I came, but I will not go too far on this. I came first to New York because I brought a French company. We had offices just in front of World Trade Center, New York, and that was between May and September 2001. I arrived from Paris. We were supposed, our D-date for the business was on 9/13, and I came from Paris on the 9th of September, and on the 10th, I forgot to mention, for those who know New York, we were living in Battery Park City, so we were crossing the World Trade Center to go back to our home, and I was there the 11th in the morning, but fortunately, I was lucky. I was jet-lagged. I needed a breakfast, so we stopped at 8:40 or something like that. And the place where we had our breakfast was in Ground Zero, and we saw a lot of bad things, but that's an old story. So I was 45. By the way, life is always full of chances. Well, I never really wanted to go to the United States. More precisely, as I mentioned, I had families. So Samuel, the one who came the first, had a son, Simon Schulman. I visited him in 1990. We went to the World Trade Center. He showed me, and he was 90 years old, and we were in the offices, so someone quickly came and said, "What do you do there?" or something like that. But we were together. That was my first real visit to the United States. By the way, I remember driving from, I took a rental car from Washington, D.C., where I was, up to New York, and that was an experience. So back to your question, I came in when I was 46. I could have gone back, but I stayed. And by the way, I'm still going frequently to France, and when I'm in France, I'm saying that I'm an American, so everybody is telling me, "Oh, you don't have any accent." That's wonderful, which is a good way for me. It's not the same thing.
That's funny. My family moved from Dallas, Texas to Chicago when I was 11, and I guess I had a small Southern accent. I don't remember having a significant accent, but a lot of people would have me, they'd say, like, "Say this," they thought it was funny to hear that little bit of a twang. So I can relate to that. Alain, just to follow up, you're in your 40s. How do you feel like being that age affected your experience as an immigrant?
Well, first of all, as I mentioned, I came for work opportunities. I had children when I was very young, and I decided to work in a bank. I was an executive to raise them. And then I was very fond of internet. I discovered a long time ago, but in France things are very old. I will always remember that in 1996 I did a huge meeting, a little bit like that, to introduce everybody in my bank to the internet. and they were the number 2 of the bank, who had terrible remarks saying, you should not spend your time with this, it will disappear in 6 months. And she said that in front of everybody. So when I came here, professional life is much easier. I mean, after a while, I didn't stay to the French company I brought, but I built my own company, and it's easier. I was speaking with French friends, telling me, oh, you are lucky, you would never be able to do what you have done here. So that's why I came, and mainly.
Thank you. Adolfo, I'll ask you this question. What kind of challenges do you remember being an immigrant? Were there things that you felt like were not available to you, or did you encounter xenophobia? Were there times where you felt othered?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I had this friend in elementary school, Anthony LaGioia, right? So Italian, right? Oh, I liked it. He was a great guy. I hung out with him, really, really nice. I wanted to be Italian. I emphasized the word Mexican earlier, and I did that on purpose because, I grew up in a time in Southern California when, it's not like today. Today we've got Salma Hayek, we've got these great Mexico City movie directors, we've got Guillermo del Toro. So many Mexicans to be proud of in American society, right? I was reading Surfer magazine when I was 10 years old, and I was seeing Jerry Lopez. And I saw the name Lopez. I'm like, oh my God. But it turns out he's like Filipino, sort of, right? He's not Mexican. I didn't know that. So he was one of mine, right? One of kind of my Mishpacha. So yeah, there was xenophobia, yeah. But as a kid, I don't know. It was there, but I didn't feel it outright. The challenge is kind of what I brought up earlier about my friend Anthony LaGioia. I was very proud of where I was born. I knew my family history. I knew my country's history. I had aunts and uncles in Tijuana who were school teachers, right? So we'd go to their house over the weekend, and there'd be textbooks that I would pick up and read all the time, right? But in San Diego, there were times when people asked me, well, what are you, right? I wouldn't say Mexican. Right. What are you? Never say Mexican, never. And we can do a whole, and I'm not the person to teach it, but we could do a little class on California, Southern California, and kind of, Mexican identity and the xenophobia, and how Mexicans have a very special place in American society when it comes to xenophobia among other groups. But anyway, yeah, that was a challenge.
When Cantor Cooper asked us earlier about why Ruth continued to be called the Moabite, I wonder if it was a badge of honor, right? Maybe she, like you say, proudly, you're a Mexican, right? Perhaps she was proud, right? Positive way of thinking about it, I don't know. Maggie, a challenge perhaps that you experienced? Did you experience a sense of being othered, or that people were afraid of you?
After that first year, I was actually lucky because I feel that I came at very interesting times here in the United States.
What year was that? Did you come?
I came in 1961.
I think if you put the mic a little closer to you.
Like this?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, so I came in 1961, and it took about a year, 2 years for me to feel really comfortable. But as I said, I was lucky. My last 2 years, this was a period of civil rights movement, very strong, Martin Luther King, and the Democratic Party was something that I had an affinity for. Well, the reason was we had this group that was called the Young Democrats. And it was led by a young woman whose father was a person in government. So she had that affinity for putting together groups. And I remember going on a special, I don't know what it was exactly, I can't remember, but I do remember that we were standing there and vying for LBJ. And we were screaming all the way with LBJ against Goldwater, okay? So we kind of knew already what was good, what was bad, and so on. But the other thing was, as far as, how shall I say that, being a stranger, I never felt that. I never hid the fact that I was Jewish because I had this pride, I was Israeli, okay? So I had the backbone. Yeah, I did. And so they always looked at me at that point as someone exotic. I didn't wear the bouffant hairdos. I had this Joan Baez kind of look of, did I do it again?
Like an angle, like that, yeah. Like
Okay,
that.
so I was saying that they looked at me as someone exotic. I wasn't a Jew in the sense of what they kind of maybe knew around them, because they actually didn't. There weren't too many of them. The other thing was, as far as Kennedy, I remember Kennedy. It was a big, I mean, I think I was a junior or senior at that time, and I went with a group of friends, and they were Catholics, and I didn't have any qualms about going into a Catholic church because I knew who I was. I just went with my friends because they were Catholic, and I said, why not? I didn't think of it, actually. It was not anything that I would think about. Also, during that period, I was chosen for some reason as the representative to a civil rights convention for youth. By that time, I knew English enough, I guess, and I didn't really understand why, but I guess it's all the vibes that they got from me through those 2 years.
Thank you. Great, thank you. Alain, experiences perhaps as a new immigrant where you felt like you weren't welcomed, or challenges that you experienced?
Well, honestly, I never had real issue. My main concern still today is that each time I'm opening my mouth, someone is telling me, where are you from? So I'm a little tired by that. I didn't, well, I could have taken classes to improve that, but a lot of women told me, oh, it's very pleasant, a French accent. And I believe that. It was probably a mistake. I have to say also that I came to this country, and that's the other challenge. I came to this country because, well, I am divorced in France, and I remarried here to a lady who was not Jewish but converted. We went at that time. We were living in Redondo Beach, and we were at Temple Menorah, and she had. We were with Rabbi Silver at that time, and I remember it was funny, Rabbi Silver, because when she went to the mikveh, I think he opened the curtain, but that's okay. My feeling. I could be wrong.
All right, we're gonna assume the best on that one.
Okay. That's the feeling I had, but it didn't last. It didn't last, and something also I discovered: it's difficult to have a French accent. And relationship between men and women in the United States seems to me very different.
Interesting. So this is a question more for Maggie and Adolfo. How do you feel like your immigrant experience differed from your parents? And obviously you came together with your parents, with your mother. I don't know if you had a chance to speak with them about it, once you were an adult, but obviously very different stages of life. Maggie, what about you? What would you say?
I was a and there was kind, okay, I'm not used to this, huh?
Sorry, you're doing
Okay.
great. You're doing great.
All right, so, oh, thanks. Where was the question?
How do you feel your parents' immigrant experience differed from yours?
Yes, of course. You know, as a young person, you adjust much faster. But as far as my parents were concerned, my father actually came looking for a better economic situation, because there was, during the 50s, it was a time of austerity, recession. We actually had, were given food stamps, and we were so excited that once a month we got chocolate, you know, as a kid. But here in the United States, he was already in his 50s. And of course, there was no English involved, not much. So he saw an ad in the paper, and they were looking for a maintenance person in a hospital, a Christian or Catholic hospital. And so he decided to go and apply. And he goes over there, and he stands there, and he says, "Me, no congressman. Me, come work." And I remember that. And I thought, okay, so they hired him after a day or so because they saw what he could do. He was a very hardworking person. He'd get up very early in the morning, took a bus, stayed late at work, and he would come home pretty late, tired, but he was devoted to his work. They actually, the nuns, were crazy about him. He was very sweet and kind and always smiling, like me. No. And the administrators loved him, so when he was sick, they took care of him, which was great. And then when he retired, I remember he worked for about 10 years, I would say. They actually didn't just give him a watch. They actually had a big party, and I was so proud of my father. I always was. And the idea of honoring your elders, that was very strong in my DNA from school, right? And honor your father and your mother, okay? The 10 Commandments were very important, as much as I understood. Some of it I did, some of it I didn't. So anyway, yeah, that was his life for quite a while.
Yeah, I appreciate that. You know, we know that so often with immigrants that adult immigrants, they end up having to find different lines of work. Right. We've seen that here at Temple Israel. We've employed a number of our custodial staff over my tenure here have been immigrants who were professionals living, you know, in Russia or in Ukraine, you know, working as dentists or legal secretaries and things like that, and who've come here and, you know, this is the kind of work they could get, right? Maintenance work or otherwise. Yeah,
yeah, it was hard. But I was trying to say something else about it. Oh, yes. When it took us just 3 years to get citizenship because my brother, who was already here, was told that if he goes into the army in Texas, an Israeli boy, he was in the paratroopers in Israel. Well, if you go into the army, you can get citizenship pretty quickly, and then you can bring your parents, and they can become citizens in 3 years. So here are my parents, terrified that they have to go, and I don't know who said this, maybe you did, terrified that they have to go before a judge and tell them something about what they know about government. But I was already a senior. I had the right to vote. I went through government classes, American history, the whole bit. So I tried to teach them. And what happened, as soon as they got there, all they asked him, who was the first president of the United States? And of course, they knew that because I told them. And they passed. That was it.
Mazel tov.
An Israel, American citizen, which was different. Today it's a little different, right?
Thank you.
And I was excited to answer a lot more questions because, again, I was younger. They asked me many more. And I was like, oh, boy, I know all that. Anyway.
And Alain also knew more. He wanted more questions on the quiz.
Yeah, right.
All right. We'll quiz you more later. All right. Adolfo, tell us a little bit about your mom's experience. How do you think her feelings about leaving Mexico differed from yours?
Well, when she was, I think when she was 17, well, I'll say what I felt when you first asked that question before Maggie answered, and that's that I felt lonely as a person here. So what does that mean, right? Okay, so lonely in the sense, you already heard me say that, just in pop culture and everything, I didn't really see people like myself or my relatives, and that's, but also, and it made me think of, I think it was the Torah portion, a teaching I was listening to, either for last week's Torah portion or the one before, which is places of holiness, kadosh, right? Places. And the teaching talked about the Rebbe, Menachem Schneerson, and about how he never went to Israel. And people asked him, why don't you, I mean, it's the Rebbe, right? Why didn't you ever go to Israel? And ultimately, he told somebody, and this was secondhand, the person giving the teaching said heard the secondhand, and that's that he did not want to be a day away from his father-in-law's grave, the previous Rebbe. That was his place of his holy place. And that got me thinking a lot about that. Okay, I have plenty of holy places in Mexico, right? And so, okay, so what are my holy places here? And maybe I didn't feel like I had them, right? My grandparents weren't buried here. Yeah, we had this aunt, some relatives in San Pedro. This is from a San Diego point of view, right? In San Pedro, oh, where is that, right? That's far away, right? Okay, but then I started learning about my relatives who had preceded me here, right? I have a photograph of my mother's father, and he's in a double-breasted suit, pinstripe, nice hat, and he's in one of these photo studios, a painted backdrop of a bar. So the shelves with the liquor bottles painted on there, and he's with a friend of his, right? On the back it says, Diciembre, Nueva York, 1945. They had some means, right, to be able to take a photo like that. He was a bracero. He was a worker brought through this program the United States had during World War II when it needed Mexicans. Brought them. My grandfather was one of them. Like, oh my God, he's been to New York, and oh my God, right? Wow, all right. And then I have a document from one of my relatives in Chicago. It's a border crossing document, just a really simple one-page document that has my great-grandmother's name, her daughter, the date is either 1925, 1928, right? So my grandmother was 3 years old. The document says they were in Laredo, Texas, crossing from Mexico, headed to Chicago. She had $50 with her, and they were going to go meet her husband in Chicago. So going back to this places of holiness, okay, so she established a place. So maybe Chicago's my place, right? One of my places. So that's an indirect way of answering your question. My mom had already come to the United States too. So she preceded me. When she was 17, she went to New York and spent some time there with those relatives, right? Those Chicago relatives. So that's why she already had the bug to come here. Yeah.
We talked a little earlier about the challenges of becoming a citizen. Can you tell us a little bit about I guess, Maggie, you started talking a little bit about through your brother, right? That's interesting. I don't remember you were telling me that before. You were able to become a citizen quickly. It only took a few years, 3 years. Mm-hmm. Microphone.
Actually, my father wanted to come to the U.S. even when we were still in Germany. But my brother was already in Israel, and he hasn't seen him for 9 years because of the war and so on. And my brother came to Israel. He was brought after the Holocaust. He was in Bergen-Belsen, but he was brought to Israel by the Jewish Agency. And but before he was able to come here, they took him as an orphan, but he wasn't, to Belgium first and then to France. And that's why we didn't see him. But anyway, he got to Israel when, just before 1948. And he was old enough eventually to be a soldier. He knew enough Hebrew. They taught him during those times in Belgium. And so my father decided, I don't think I want to go to Canada or to the United States. I want to go see my son. And that's how it started, the first time. And then after that, again, as I told you in the beginning, there was horrible austerity in Israel, and especially for certain people, not everyone. And, but he then wanted to come to America again. And he had a shop, and he had 2 partners, much younger than him. And so each one of them left, one to Australia and one to the United States. So there he was all by himself, and he still continued working. He was making pipes for the farmers down in the Negev, but they couldn't pay him. So they paid him with food, and we had food at that point. But you know, I wanted to add something, because here is an experience in the first part of the 50s, okay? I mean, a lot of different people from all over the world in Israel, they were trying to put them all together and create a country with all these people. But I had the opportunity to move to another place when I was 10. And that place, when I saw it, I can still smell it. It was like the Garden of Eden. It's on the way from Haifa to Nazareth, so it's before you get to the valley, and it was hills. And all I remember, it was raining, and the smell of the earth was amazing. And so we managed to get a little apartment, which was fine. And as kids, we would be going to the forest there, and there were so many beautiful flowers, and we collected mushrooms. And in that particular place, my whole education was geared to patriotism, to pride to be Israeli. The people who lived there were actually second generation, or the kids that I went to school with. Many of them, their parents came from Germany before, or from Hungary, or from Czechoslovakia, young people. But even their grandparents came in the late 1800s, so there was this pride of being an Israeli. So there I became a member of a youth group, and the idea was that eventually we're going to go to a kibbutz. Some of my friends did end up in a kibbutz. In fact, one of them actually was in a kibbutz called Iftach, which is in the northern part of Israel. And of course, they were just evacuated during this war. But my father didn't like the idea. He was more religious, and they were mostly not religious in that place, okay? Intellectuals, engineers, and so on. So he didn't like me to be part of it, because he was afraid that I'm going to be one of those people, a communist or a socialist, or, you know. The idea of a kibbutz, he didn't even like, because my cousins who came, they were 20-something. They all went directly to a kibbutz from Cyprus. They were not able to come to Israel. But eventually, each one was communist one, and another one that was more socialist. But the thing was interesting and important about it, they were poor kibbutzim, right? Can you hear me? They were poor kibbutzim. So when I was little and I wanted to go visit, it was very difficult. They did not let people who were not brothers or sisters come. And the life there was also interesting for a child. I wasn't supposed to mingle with the kids who were in those dormitories. They were not living with their parents. Today's totally different. But at that time, they were very strict about having strangers come in. Well, we were strangers because we were just cousins. But I still found it interesting. You know, we would go to a dining hall, eating together. Each one had his role. They all had to work certain, well, in the farm or in the kitchen, no matter who you were.
Yeah. So Maggie, I just want to pause it because we want to make sure we get through all the questions. But what I'm hearing, particularly about Israel, is that was a country of immigrants, right? It was a country that was being built from the ground up by so many different people, which is perhaps different than your immigration experiences to this country. You moved to a country that was more established, right? But the Israel experience, we talk about a place of immigrants, a land of immigrants. Yeah. Alain, can you tell us about the process of becoming a citizen, how you navigated that, you know, how long that took?
Before saying that, I want to say to Adolfo that member of my family are Lopez, so because they were conversos, Spanish. But so how did it go? Well, it's very simple. I entered to this country with the visa H-1B because I was employed by a company. We did everything by the book. I mean by that, we placed advertising. They were recruiting a marketing director, and they didn't find, so they chose me. After that, I married, so I had very quickly my green card, and then, as I mentioned, after this very ridiculous exam, I got my citizenship. But at that time also, I thought, but I could be wrong, I had created a company, I had something like 10 employees, so maybe they said, oh, this guy is, and his name is Silverston, so I don't know. It was very easy, I mean, very easy. Yes, I never had any other problem than the two I mentioned, my accent and relationship. But by the way, one thing I would like to say, so first of all, I mentioned my grandmother who was arrested on the 16th of July 1942 and who died, as well as one of her brother. My father and his brother were lucky, very lucky. My father wrote a diary during the war, and I discovered it not so long ago, and I was very surprised by one sentence. In December 41, they were trying to escape. I don't know if you know that or if you remember. France was part in two. The north was occupied by the German. The south was temporarily free under Pétain. And my father was trying to cross the line. And in the train, he wrote, well, when he was in the train, he wrote something like, I failed Gestapo, I change of train. So it means that if he didn't feel that the Gestapo was in the train, he could have been arrested and I would not be there to speak of that. Life is very, very strange. I mean, a lot of things. In the same way, you could see at my family that they were not religious. If they were religious, they would wear a kippah. Nobody is wearing. It's a picture, I believe, 1896 or something like that. So we were not really religious. We were even, my father's father was probably communist, or at least he had a lot of Jewish friend communists at high level. And but what was your question?
You answered about how easy it was to become a citizen.
Well, I didn't say that I was communist, but when I entered to this country, but I was not. Otherwise, it would have created some issues.
Adolfo, I'll let you answer that question about what the process was like for you to become a citizen, and then we've got another one or two questions, and we'll try and wrap this up. I know it is approaching 10 o'clock. Although, traditionally, we'd be here all night. Who wants to stay all night? All right, we won't stay all night. So, Adolfo, can you tell us a little bit about the process of becoming a citizen?
You know, this thought is just in my head, and it's from Parsha Hayei Sarah, right? So it's Sarah's dead, and so Abraham's looking for a place to bury her, and he goes to the Hittite, the first time I came across this was, I don't know, whatever, like 10 years ago with Rabbi Moskowitz over there in Albemarle or something like that, right? He says, Ger v'toshav anochi imachem, right? So he says, I am a foreigner and a resident among you. And so, you know, just like with most things Torah, there's hundreds, more than 1,000 years of teaching on that builds on that, right? So quite a few thoughts, right? So one of them being that for him, the past, present, and the future lives in that moment with him, right? So he is not from there. He's looking, this is the first, Abraham's the first Jew, right? The first Jew to own land there, right? Right? So, but he doesn't own it, but it will be, right? Right? Okay, so that is really interesting to me, right? And is, if we are here to celebrate Torah as blessing, that to me is the blessing, right? A blessing of many. I mean, just like 10 inches to my left, I've stood twice with my kids becoming bar and bat mitzvah. That's a blessing. This is my holy place, one of my holy places. This is, right? All right, the citizenship question, which the citizen question actually asks you, right? It is a choice, right? It is a choice. It's a choice. It's a choice. I didn't choose the blessing of being Mexican. It just happened, right? But I did choose to be an American citizen, right? I did choose that. One of the memories, so you go through a period of having a green card. My mother and I both got our green card at the same time, post 186, whatever, 1986, 87. And that to me was a critical moment because I was a senior in high school in 1987, right? That was a critical moment. That came at just the right time. Okay, and so then she became a citizen, I became a citizen in 2000. Yes, the test, but really the thing that stands out with me the most is that green card, which for me, and I think this is something that, you know, Jews from the old country, especially those living through the period of the war, before, during, and after, documents are so important. That green card was so important. The passport that we had before that with the American visa stamped on there saying tourist, even though we lived in San Diego, was so important. Documents were so important. And I had to give up that green card, and it went into a cardboard box with piles of other green cards, right? That moment stands out for me. And then, you know, I got a little American flag, I waved it, and everybody, my mother-in-law was there, Lisa was there, and happily ever after.
Our step-nephew just became an American citizen like a week or two ago. He shared something very similar about the green card, that it was sad to give it up. Like, he's been holding on to that for a long time. He's from Israel.
Can
Alain,
I add something on this?
Please.
Because also I was and I'm still a French citizen because I could have two citizenships. And it's not everybody who could do that. It depends on the country. For instance, if you were Belgian in the past, you had to choose between the Belgian citizenship and the American one.
Which country?
Belgium.
Belgium, got it.
It was not possible to have two citizenships. And same thing for Japanese or Chinese people. They cannot be at the same time American or Japanese.
So that's actually a great kind of wrap-up question. Then I'll let you answer this question first, Alain, and that's about your feelings about France now, or your feelings about Israel, and your identity as an American, as a French, as an Israeli, as a Mexican. How does that, what are your feelings about it? How does that factor into your identity?
Let me start by Israel. It happened that when I was 17, I left France for Israel, and I lived in a kibbutz